Welcome to the Afghanistan Project Podcast. I'm your host, Beth Bailey, and my guest today is someone that many of my listeners will be familiar with. John Ondrasik, also known as Five for Fighting, is a platinum-selling Grammy-nominated recording artist. With chart-topping hits like Superman, It's Not Easy, and 100 Years, and sales of more than 3 million records during his musical career, it's no wonder that John holds its spot in the top 10 of hot adult contemporary artists for the 2000s. John's musical focus for the last several years has shifted to songs that seek to improve the world. In September of 2021, he released Blood on My Hands, which takes an apolitical stance on the horrors of the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. In the aftermath of the tragedy, John got involved with evacuation efforts in Afghanistan and has supported nonprofit organizations Save Our Allies with the proceeds from Blood on My Hands. Like many members of the Afghanistan evacuation community, John also responded to subsequent instances of injustice. In 2022, he wrote Can One Man Save the World to support Ukraine's efforts to fight for freedom and justice amidst Russian incursions. In the wake of the atrocities Hamas committed against innocent civilians and the hundreds of civilians it took hostage after the terror group infiltrated Israel on October 7th, 2023, John released OK, which aptly explains that impacted communities are not okay. John fundraises for the efforts he supports on his charity website, What Kind of World Do You Want?, which I'll be linking to in our show notes. John, it's a tremendous honor to have you here today. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Beth. Pleasure to be with you.
Well, I feel like I always start the podcast out the same way, and I'm going to do it again today. What got you involved with Afghanistan in the withdrawal timeframe, or did your efforts start before that?
It actually started the day our last soldier left Afghanistan. I was driving to Mammoth with my wife and my son for a vacation, and I got a call from a friend of mine, a woman who does incredible philanthropic work around the world. And she said, I need a phone number. And I'm like, okay. And there was a guy she needed to talk to who goes into trouble spots around the world and can kind of pull some strings. And I said, what's going on? She goes, well, we have to go to Afghanistan and rescue the Americans and our allies we've left behind. And I pulled over to the side of the road and I said, wait a minute, you're going down to Afghanistan and rescue Americans that we abandoned. And there was a pause on the line. And she said, well, somebody has to. And I was so angry that, my friend was risking her life and others to go do something that we caused and that we had no interest in addressing. And I wasn't at that point planning on writing a song. I was banging on the piano because I was, that's what I do when I'm mad. But what really scared me and prompted me to write the song was when General Milley and General Austin came out and said, oh, what an extraordinary success. What a good job we did. And that scared me because, I've always felt that sometimes, politicians will do things for political reasons. They will not be honest with us, which was the case, obviously, in Afghanistan. But I've always thought that, our military leaders are the adults in the room. And I've spent 20 years performing for our troops. I've met many generals, grunts on the line, reservists at Gitmo. My passion for my career has been performing for our troops. And, they have this thing called honor. And when General Milley and General Austin did that, that was excruciating to me because they were lying to us. They were promoting a political narrative. And very quickly, I wrote Blood on My Hands. It was kind of a scream. It was just a primal scream. And I named names and I basically called us out for abandoning our allies and abandoning American citizens to terrorists. And it became a voice for many of our Afghan veterans who felt gutted, who felt ashamed, who still feel ashamed. And as you mentioned, the song kind of got to a place where I was getting emails from people trapped in Afghanistan. That's how surreal it got. And as you mentioned, I started joining some of these amazing groups.
So tell me about then the groups that you were involved with. I know that you've been able to get some people out of Afghanistan as a result of that, which, did you even think that that was something you could possibly be involved in? Even when you got that call saying, somebody has to go do it, did you think you might end up being one of the somebodies helping from this side?
Well, of course not. It was surreal. I'm like, that's how desperate people were. Our government was failing them. So they had to go to these NGOs, and some of them were literally life and death situations, and I didn't know what to do. And I went online, and I found the first group I found was a group called Project Exodus Relief, very small group. Most of these are basically Green Berets, special forces, who on their own started, raising money, flying planes, rescuing people. Then, of course, Operation Pineapple, Scott Mann's group, Task Force Argo. All of a sudden, I was very quickly introduced to these heroic Americans doing incredible things. And then, of course, there was the fundraising side. My friend, who I mentioned, went down to Afghanistan. She was working to, book planes. But the problem they were having was kind of liaisoning with Congress, because you'll have people trapped at the Tajikistan border, but you need kind of a member of Congress to advocate for them. So basically, my role was kind of connecting the dots between many of these groups to congressional members, and they were incredibly helpful. Mike Waltz, of course, the first Green Beret elected to Congress, Tom Cotton, Joni Ernst. So I had this connection of, it was so surreal, Beth. There was a day that I was talking to my friend about four elderly Americans, Afghans trapped at the Tajikistan's border. They were in their 80s. They probably wouldn't survive another day, and they couldn't get across because the paperwork wasn't there. And I was literally texting, senators on the Hill while they were questioning Milley in Austin during the hearing, and they were responding to me. So while they were asking Milley questions about how is this happening, they were literally in real time assisting us in rescuing Americans and Afghan allies. You mentioned Save Our Allies, just an incredible group, got out 16,000 Afghan allies in 9 days. And, the disgrace of it, the shame of it will never be able to unstain for what we did there. But I'm glad on this podcast to let people know that there are incredible heroes that you'll never know. A guy named Sea Spray, because that's what we call him, was literally wading people through sewers every night in Kabul, under the gates, female judges, lesbian and gay people, girls, people at risk, getting them to airplanes, getting them out, sleeping an hour, going back into Kabul, being hunted by Hamas, and doing this every night for 20 days. So that's the hope in this. But and I still have girls in Pakistan that we're trying to get out. The effort still goes on. Of course, nobody wants to talk about it, but there are still being people rescued. Unfortunately, so many that we abandoned have been hunted down by the Taliban and murdered.
Yeah, I'm still seeing those stories every day, every week at least. There's somebody who gets caught and gets murdered and sometimes delivered back to their family and sometimes not. And to your point about the lesbian gay community, I mean, that community has really been in danger since we left, because the Taliban have no desire to have anyone who is non-straight in their country. Yeah. And I know that at least people have been stoned. I don't know if it's to death. I can't recall that. But when they started doing the public executions and the public beatings again, I remember that the first group of people that were targeted included a number of gay men. So, this was such an important effort, and we knew who we needed to get out. And it's great that many of those individuals were able to be saved because of those efforts. And it's just unfortunate that had to happen in the way it did. That we've addressed the withdrawal so many times, but it just never ceases to amaze me that it happened as badly as it happened. I'm just those groups that you have in Pakistan, how were they some of the people who contacted you in the beginning who you knew needed help, or how did you get connected to especially the women in Pakistan right now? Can you tell me that story, how that came to pass?
Yeah, there were some musical groups and women's choirs and children's choirs that that we were able to get out because we had a public light on them. The Taliban, I think we're kind of incentivized to, okay, let's get them out so we don't have the bad publicity. But there were many others that were not able to get on planes. So we just try to get them out of Afghanistan anywhere, and Pakistan was an easy place. And of course, in the last year, Pakistan's been cracking down and sending people back, basically to their death. So fortunately for this group of young girls, we have had some assistance from the State Department, but it's a very long process. It's years. It's years. But of course, then there's their families, because people don't realize in many of these situations, the few that can get out, get an S1 or get S2. Perhaps they won't let their parents out, or they won't let the father out. They're like, let some of the women out. There were horrible, horrible situations during the withdrawal where our government was saying, okay, you can take 5. Can you imagine having your family of, your wife, your 2 daughters, your 2 sons, your sister, your uncles, and they come to you and say, okay, we'll take, 4 women, and, 1 man. And you have to decide who gets to live and who gets to die. I mean, it just boggles your mind that our country did this, and that nobody's been fired, nobody's been demoted, nobody's had any consequence. And just in the last month, we've seen that many of the talking points that the administration gave us were false, and they shoved everything under the rug. So the fact there's been no accountability as well is an incredible disgrace. But we out there, and folks much more active than me, are still rescuing people every day and trying to do the right thing. And people have taken Afghans into their home, and we have got a lot of them out. But certainly, I think until there's a change of administration, this disgrace will not be properly addressed. They have 4 or 5 people in the State Department going through SIV, the S1s and all the stuff. We should have 5,000 people doing that, but we don't.
It's really disappointing. And, you talk about the musical groups. And so for anybody listening who doesn't understand why that's important, the Taliban outlawed music from day one. I believe it was very early on. They don't believe in music. They think it is anti-Islamic. There's like 1 instrument, I think, that they are allowed to use. It makes god awful music, and that's all that there is. So, I mean, there were images of the Taliban taking all the instruments from people, putting them into heaps and burning them. And so, anybody who was promoting music of any variety, not just Western music, but just music, was then in danger. So, especially if you were someone prominent, it just sounds so silly that musical groups, what? Musical groups are in danger? Yes, they are, because this is who the Taliban are. Same thing with female judges. These are women, educated, who probably put Talibs and or ISIS fighters and or, different groups into jails. And therefore, they practiced Western law, not the Taliban's variety of Islamic law. And so, they're immediately in danger. So are their male counterparts. I think it's really important for Westerners to understand that this, we can't think of enemies as narrowly as we do. Like, you have to think about them from the Taliban's point of view, who their enemies are. And it's just such a wide variety that should horrify all of us, I think. What have you seen from the people that you've tried to support? What were their struggles under the Taliban?
Well, look, I mean, we've literally thrown the Afghan people, particularly the 20 million women, into Game of Thrones, right? It's barbaric. Girls can still not go to school. And God help you if you try to stand up to the Taliban. It's a death sentence. So, we've really, after giving them a taste of freedom and women's rights and human rights, it's all evaporated. And because Afghanistan is not really a geopolitical center of interest for the world, it's been pushed off the pages. That's ironic. I find a certain equivalence to what's happening in Gaza and Israel. That you have a lot of these groups that claim to stand up for human rights, stand up for women's rights, and the women's rights groups were very silent on Afghanistan. They still are. It's been the biggest decimation of women's rights in our lifetimes, what's happened in Afghanistan. And similar to the women's groups who are silent on not only Israel and the women that were raped and tortured by Hamas, but Palestinian women, because they're under the same yoke as Afghan women. I put in my OK video a woman, a incredibly brave Palestinian woman, calling out Hamas for stealing the aid. It's like, I hope she's still with us. I doubt she is. You speak up against Hamas, you're killed. So it's been clarifying in many respects to see so many of these groups, politicians who scream about women's rights and human rights, and all of a sudden they're quiet about Afghanistan because it was their administration who caused it, and quiet about Israeli women and Palestinian women because it doesn't fit their political narrative. So, if anything, it's been a clarifying moment, and I think we need to take a lot of these organizations and politicians' word with a grain of salt, because there's no stand behind it. These are moral messages. They shouldn't be political ones, but for so many, it's been politicized.
Yeah, I've seen just this morning, that we're recording this probably about 5 days before it will get released, 6 days before it'll get released. So for people who are paying attention at home, it's the 7th of May right now, and the Rafah incursion began. And last night I saw John Spencer from West Point talking about how UNICEF was encouraging people to stay put as Israel was preparing to go into Rafah and telling people to get out. And John Spencer was saying, well, you're then going to encourage death. Like, why would you do this? Don't you want to save? This is UNICEF. Aren't you supposed to save the children? And you've got all these people doing, the world has lost its mind. And as I was actually preparing for this episode, I was thinking, wow, like disaster after disaster you have written songs about, and it's more disasters in a concentrated period than I've ever seen in my lifetime, between the withdrawal and everyone will tell you, Ukraine happened as a result of the withdrawal. We showed our hand at how weak we were, and Russia said, well, good, we're going. And then we have Hamas and October 7th. I mean, this is a horrifying time. And I wanted to ask you this. You have written songs that have gone around the world and been streamed and listened to millions and millions of times, right? And now you're writing these songs that they're not going to have that reach. What was the change? Why change now?
It wasn't any plan. To be honest with you, I kind of I get annoyed when celebrities stand on their soapbox and lecture to us about politics. It's annoying, and it's not, most of them are very foolish, and frankly, throughout my career, I think you could see my worldview, but I wasn't lecturing people. I'm not smarter than anybody else, but there have been protest songs in the past that speak to the times, and they're important, and they give you a sense of the times in a way nothing ever can. And Blood on My Hands was a protest song. It was basically right out of the 60s. Even the musical style was like a protest song out of the 60s. And you're exactly right. After Afghanistan, we knew the next domino would be Ukraine, and it was. We weren't expecting October 7th, but I'm sure Putin greenlit that to take the focus off Ukraine, which it did. And frankly, Beth, I'm afraid Taiwan is next, because why not? If you're going to move on Taiwan, why don't you move now with all the chaos in the world? If this administration is refusing to send Israel weapons as we speak, Ukraine is basically on a tipping point of losing, and we have an election coming. Why wouldn't Xi go now? That's my big fear right now. But yeah, it is weird that the songs I write will not have one play on the radio. We sent the songs to 400 music media outlets. One of them covered them. The mainstream media has basically been shunning these songs. So the fact that they've had this impact, which is very surprising and humbling, and to be able to go to Ukraine and perform the song with the Ukrainian orchestra, to go to Israel a couple weeks ago, perform a song no one's ever played on the radio at Hostage Square for the families where millions of people know the song. It's very different and surreal, but I do think it shows you the unique power of the arts to address these issues. And, after 9/11, we had the Concert for New York. That was a very powerful moment, standing up for America. It provided solace for so many, still to this day, families who lost loved ones in 9/11, the police, the firefighters there. They talk about how important that was. Sun City, Live Aid, go down the list. So music is a way to kind of, I think, crash through these walls. And my song proves that. I just wish I was a higher profile songwriter, because to be honest with you, I shouldn't be writing this song. The folks that were on stage at the Concert for New York, the icons, I'm not going to name names, but we know who they are. Some of them are Jewish. But the fact that the music industry has been so dead quiet on October 7th illustrates the theme of my song, We're Not Okay. Something's very wrong when every musician, every band, many of them Jewish, are either part of the anti-Israel oppressee crowd or they're quiet. They're quiet. The last image of my OK video is Martin Luther King saying, silence in the face of evil is complicity. And virtually to a man, to a band, to a manager, to a agent, there's a hell of a lot of complicity going on in the music business.
Yeah. In fact, I will say too, MLK Jr. was a proponent of Israel. He supported, from everything I've read, Israel. And today I think would say, this is not acceptable. But to your point too, there are 2 points I want to make. The first one, I remember growing up in, the 90s and early 2000s, there were so many celebrities willing to stand up for, hunger in Africa and things like this. And it was a trend back then. And today, I think you are the only person I've seen who has taken a stand. And I'm glad that you did. I mean, think about it. If you hadn't been there to make those calls, to help lend your voice during the withdrawal and things like that. And, we've talked to many people on this podcast about the moral injury of the withdrawal and everything like that. Your song speaks to that and speaks to the people who needed to hear it. And so those things are incredibly important for all the hostage families who are still wondering where their loved ones are. OK is an anthem. And for every Jew around the world who is now facing immense anti-Semitism, how important is that? So I think that's just incredible. But the other problem is then you have, I don't even know this artist, but I know he's big. Macklemore. Is that how you say his name? He just came out with like the pro-Hamas song, basically. Right.
Yeah.
And that to me is like, no, or all the people who wore the red hands. Remember that? Which, if you are familiar with that problem set, that's an image from the Intifada of, I believe it was like an Israeli victim being killed and his hands were covered in blood and he was pressing against a window. And that was what people wore at a Hollywood event. How many of them knew that that's what they were wearing?
No, I mean, look, the Macklemore song, I think, again, is just a reflection of the times. And I think it reflects many of the views of young artists and, frankly, young people who've been indoctrinated to this perceived oppressor versus oppressee. They're surrounded by groupthink. They think they're being virtuous. But what's really despicable is there are other artists of iconic platforms who know better. They know that that's not true. And they're afraid to push back and educate and talk about why this is happening. It's the same thing as the students on our campuses who are being indoctrinated by faculty and the radicals. There's really nobody. I was talking to a student who was saying, the Palestinians are slaves in Israel. She's been taught that. She literally believes that Palestinians are slaves in Israel. And I said, you understand, I was actually in Jaffa a couple of weeks ago and there's like 2 million Arabs there and they're not protesting. So they're being fed this dogma. And also, I think some of them are trying to ride that train. And they think, I think Macklemore is smart enough to know what he's saying is not true and not fair. But the problem is there's no pushback. There's no
Yeah.
pushback. There's nobody standing up. And that's what that I've been talking to people. I gave this speech at UCLA the other day that's resonating. And you need to push back. You need to go on offense. You can't just lament, oh, things are terrible. The world's bad. We all have to push back in our own way, and every voice matters. And when you stand up and speak the truth, it resonates. It puts the bullies on defense. Why are they all wearing masks? Because deep down, many of them know they're wrong. They're on the wrong side of history. They're ashamed. So, and often when you stand up to bullies, they they collapse. But that's not happening on these elite campuses. But that's our job too. I'm going to be going to some of these campuses. I'm going to be singing my song. I'm going to talk, and I'm going to bring people with me. And I do think I'm starting to see a little bit of a tipping point of people are kind of sick of this. You saw at the Met Gala, the protests, you know, because they're so insane and they're so indoctrinated. And I say too, I actually, when I gave my speech, I played okay, and I dedicated it to the student protesters because many of them feel they're doing the right thing. It's like a cult, they've
Mhm.
been indoctrinated into the cult. And so we need to save these kids. We need to save them from the radicals in their faculty, the radicals that are coming off campus and training them. So we need to save them. So for their sake, for our sake, we all have to basically stand up, do the right thing, don't worry about being canceled, and fight back. Because, everybody talks about the silent majority, right? Well, and I think the silent majority has been silent for a long time. But if you don't speak up, sometimes that silent majority becomes the silent minority, and we are losing a whole generation of kids. And if we don't face that, I think the consequences are catastrophic.
Yeah, I've been covering, and it's funny because this is the Afghanistan Project podcast, and so
Yeah,
I've not said anything about my opinions about what's happening in Israel and Gaza on this podcast, but I want to say unequivocally right now that when this started, the first thing I said was anti-Semitism is going to rise, and
yeah,
that's where I get angry. I've been covering rising anti-Semitism since my child was a year old. She's almost 7. And before that, I interned with the Department of Justice trying to chase Nazi war criminals who came here under false pretenses and get them the hell out, even though they're 80 years old. If you committed war
wow,
crimes and lied, like you don't get to have American citizenship. So, this has been something I remember reading my first Holocaust book at the age of probably 10 and thinking, how could humans do this to one another? And it just became an incredible drive for me. Like, I want to understand this and make sure it never happens again. And so it's very unsettling to me to see that, you don't want to be right about something like that. And I have been right about that. And it's seeing these kids on campuses screaming intifada. Do they know what that means? Do they know what they're calling for? Saying that Hamas are just resistance fighters, saying that there were no rapes
yeah,
when it's plethora of evidence, and then throwing out a bunch of things that are complete nonsense. It's galling, to see Holocaust terminology used against Jews and Israelis that's completely, it's only meant to cause harm. Using the term genocide, which is a very specific term and can't be determined by anyone outside of, the ICJ, who has said, no, there is no genocide now, but be careful. Yeah, it's good to stand up and be counted and say the uncomfortable thing right now. The other side will say that they're on the right side of history, but when you're calling for murders, I don't think you're on the right side of history ever. And when there's, 140% increase in anti-Semitic incidents from 2022 to 2023, which only counts then, think about that 140% increase. But October 7th was, 3/4 of the way into that year. imagine what 2024 is going to look like. I just shudder to think about what those numbers are going to be. So it's really important to stand up right now. I'm glad that you're doing it. I'm hoping that other people will take your lead.
Well, again, you do your job. And I think, the Afghanistan, podcast really encompasses all of this, because this is not Israel Hamas. This is not even, Taliban Afghanistan. This is those who want to destroy civilization versus those who want to save it. The Taliban, Hamas, Iran, Putin, China, they're all in the same subset. And I think we have to understand that. That's really what my song "We're Not Okay" is about. The UN is basically an arm of Hamas, propagandists. So, the Red Cross, as you mentioned. So we better figure out, who's on the right, who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. And sometimes there's gray area. This time it's not hard. If Hamas is not evil, there's no evil, right? So I think it's not hard. And when you stand up and shout them down or present arguments, whatever it is, inspire shame, a lot of them collapse. And because they do have no moral standing. But as you said, I'm with you. I never could have understood, how could the Holocaust happen? And I think since October 7th, tragically, we all say, oh, that's how it happened, because it's happening right now.
It's so true. I would write all the time. People would make, Holocaust allusions. Oh, you're like Himmler. Oh, this man is like Hitler.
Right.
Oh, this is whatever. And I would always say, don't ever compare anything to the Holocaust.
Thank you.
And then right after October 7th, I saw several pictures of Jewish-owned businesses where someone had broken the windows. And I said, oh no, that's Kristallnacht. That's the night of broken glass, which preceded Hitler's, immense rise to power and decision to get rid of all of the undesirables, Jews, the handicapped, Jehovah's Witnesses, like a huge number of people he didn't like, but mainly the Jews. And, that's what started it. And I was watching that and I thought, oh my Lord. And the more I see it, the more I see, Jewish students not being able to move through campus. That is very much like the Holocaust. What, are you going to put them in a ghetto next? Are you going to concentrate them in this ghetto where they can be, that's not okay. I am hoping, because I've seen, there's the Office of Civil Rights in the Department of Education that's got all these open cases now against universities who refuse to protect their Jewish students, against even elementary schools. And some of those incidents are actually anti-Islamic incidents, but that the proportion is way weighted in favor of anti-Semitic incidents. But it's going to take years to get through those cases. So what do those students do now, especially if they're in college and they're at the end of their college time? They can't wait years to get a response. So I'm hoping to see some lawsuits or something just to make sure that these schools realize they have to protect the students that are there. That is their job, and that should be their first concern.
No, I think certainly it's probably a good time to be a class action lawyer. And but again, I think unless we remove these presidents, the culture won't change, because if they had any sanity, it never would have happened to begin with. When I was in Israel a few weeks ago, I talked to Natan Sharansky, the incredible freedom fighter, kind of legendary icon. And he said something that really stuck with me. He said, 20 years ago, somebody asked me, what's the greatest threat to freedom in the West? And he said, American academia. And he's been proven right, because a lot of what led to the Holocaust started on college campuses. The radicalism started on college campuses. So he saw that coming decades ago. And now we're seeing what cake they have baked. Now, of course, it's not too late. You just do sane things. There's teachers right now refusing to grade, to give their grades to the administration because they're protesting. It's simple. You fire them for cause, then it's over. Yeah. But of course, these feckless presidents like to negotiate. There are colleges that are divesting from Israel because they're negotiating with the students. So I think it's also important for parents, one thing I've been really disappointed about is where are the parents? Where are the parents of all these kids who've been indoctrinated? Do they believe it? Are they scared? Why are they not? If that was my kid, I would be there, either dragging them out of there or saying, I'm not paying one more penny for your education. So where are the parents? So I think we all have to not wait. My kid, my daughter just graduated from NYU. If this had happened during her term there, we would have had a long conversation. So I think parents need to say, I'm not sending my kid there. Or if I'm there, I'm pulling them out. Because you know what? That's going to that's what's going to have an impact with these universities when they have billion-dollar lawsuits and there's nobody showing up for school, or that the only people are coming are the radicals that they've created themselves. So I think there has to be a big culture shift in the country. And frankly, we don't have leadership on both sides of our politics, I believe. So, we don't have the leadership in our politics, in our leaders. So we have to do it ourselves. And, Beth, you have a role to play. I have a role to play. And I think we work together, and I think, we can make a dent in this. I've seen it with Superman after 9/11. I've seen it with OK and Blood on My Hands and Can One Man Save the World. We've proved the concept. So now we just have to spread in it, keep the mission going, and really rally folks who are on our side, which is pretty much most of America.
Yep, I think they're just, like you said, it's a silent majority, and they need to be louder. Yeah, that sounds so. You've made it sound so much easier than I feel like it is right now. And gosh, I had a great question that then fled my mind immediately, which is what always happens to great questions, right?
Happens to me about 50 times a day.
Gosh, I think I need more coffee. And it almost came back for a second, I swear.
It'll come back.
It will. It'll come back at 2:00 this morning, and I'll be like, hey, there's my question. Maybe I'll think of it, but I wanted to ask you about your charity. If you could talk a bit about what kind of world do you want and the things that you are supporting with that charity right now.
Yeah, that charity was started, 15 years ago, where I had a song called What Kind of World Do You Want, which is really kind of my mission. I'm not here to tell people what to do. I'm here to ask them questions. And through that effort, we raised a lot of funds for autism families and for ALS families and for Operation Homefront and Wounded Warriors and troops families. And we still have that that's sitting there for folks who want to support some of these Afghan charities doing the work, United 24 in Ukraine, Boundless Israel, some great groups that are fighting anti-Semitism. But what I'm really focusing now on is doing, larger artistic projects and focusing on the arts to crash through some of these walls. And also, as I said, going and perform on campuses, going to these places and standing up for the Jewish students, standing up for the students who have not been indoctrinated. I'm not Jewish. You don't have to be Jewish to do this. You just have to love your country and want some sanity. And there's many faculty on these campuses that are also under siege. I met with a professor at UCLA after my speech, and he was so grateful, but he's under siege as well. For his career, can he come out and say, this is not okay? So there's a lot of faculty and administrators, and frankly, there's many artists who believe this, but they'll tell you in the room Hamas is evil, but they can't say that on social media. So what is happening to our country? So again, we just keep pushing. We fight the good fight, and it's going to be a generational battle. It's not going to be solved in a week, in a month, in a year. But as I said, we all have our role to play.
Yeah, and I feel like your campus tour could be a source of some interesting articles down the line. So keep me in your Rolodex, because I've heard so many groups that, the school says, well, no, you can't have a pro-Israel event here right now because we can't provide the security for it. And that is...
It's a cop-out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, and it's but you're letting the other kids have an encampment? So they can have an encampment, but I can't come here and... Okay.
Yeah. As I said in my speech, if it was... a group of people calling for death to Muslims, and preventing Muslims from walking across campus, assaulting Muslims. First of all, they would never allow that. And secondly, everybody would performing and criticizing that. And they'd be welcoming everybody to their campus to criticize that evil, which it is. So, the whole we can't provide security, that is, again, a sign of the times. Okay, we won't let Martin Luther King come speak, because we don't have security. Okay, we won't let Mandela come speak because we don't have security. I'm certainly not putting myself in that league, but I'm just saying it's a cop out, and they know it. And Michael Rappaport's little comedy shows were canceled last week. It's a disgrace, and we cannot accept that. And we need to push on the government leaders. And I'll just bring my guitar and sit in the quad. Okay, I'll just bring my guitar, sit in the quad, and sing a song or two. It's like we can't allow this to happen. We can't allow this to happen. And it'll be an interesting, summer and fall of next year. But I think America's becoming fed up with it. And I think hopefully you'll see more and more of this pushback from students, from parents, and from, sane people around the country.
Yeah. And I wanted to say too, I'm not Jewish either. And I've been writing about anti-Semitism. I have come under so much fire of anti-Semitism myself because people assume that I am Jewish. I had one individual go off. Like anytime I would write an article, he would write about how I was an instrument of Israel and I was a Zionist, plant. And like just horror. He scared the hell out of me with the things he would say about me.
Oh yeah.
But it's important, there are many people who would tell you anti-Semitism doesn't just impact Jewish people, because what starts with the Jews always goes to anybody who's not Jewish too. It's that an attack on the freedom of any person is an attack on the freedom of all of us. And there are so many reasons for all of us to say, no, we won't. This stops here. This stops here right now. We're not going to let anyone feel this pain. So it's so important for non-Jews right now to stand up and be allies to the Jewish community. So it's very important what you're doing. That I remember the question I was going to ask you, your Israel trip. What else did you see while you were in the country? Did you go to any of the places that Hamas had infiltrated? Because I know a number of people have done that just to see what was left.
Yeah. I mean, I went and visited some of the troops, played guitar with some of the troops. I met with many hostage families, which was just excruciating. There are no words for that. It was just heartbreaking. You feel so helpless. I wasn't planning on playing at Hostage Square. That came about very quickly. And to be able to do that and perform for Israel and the hostage families and Jewish people around the world was very humbling. We were supposed to go to the South and go to the Nova site and visit many of the kibbutzes that the massacres took place. That was the day after the Iranian attack. So the army had closed the South. So we were not able to go there. But I was able to go to Jerusalem. I did a lot in Jerusalem. As mentioned, so much of what we were doing there was focused on supporting Israel and the hostage families. And I was doing a lot of media and meeting with artists. So I look forward to going back and being able to really immerse myself more in the culture. And the thing though, Beth, that was that I take with it is the Israeli people, under this kind of darkness and this horrible atrocity in this cloud, they have this capacity to live and love life. And as everybody knew the Iranian attack was coming, you still couldn't get a reservation at a restaurant. Everybody's out. They're having dinners. They're singing. They're going. I went to a concert the night before. They're the day after the attack. Everybody's back at work. The beaches are full. And so they have this capacity to just say, okay, we're always under siege. People always want to kill us. We're not going to hide under our beds. We're going to live our life. We're going to fight back. And so I think we could all learn something from that. And I certainly came back changed. And I appreciate them kind of giving me that life lesson.
That's really amazing. I mean, and think about it. I think more Palestinian rockets, Hamas rockets have hit Palestinians in Gaza than Israelis.
Yeah.
So, they have those amazing systems that protect them too, and
Oh, I mean, thank God for the
it's
Iron Dome, or we may not be talking right now.
right, exactly. And that's the thing is like you've got 12%, I think is the estimate of Hamas rockets that fall inside Palestinian
Yeah.
territory.
Well, nobody cares about the
So,
Palestinians. The kids on campus, the radicals, the politicians, the musicians, nobody cares about Palestinians. If they did, they would be calling for release the hostages, stop using Palestinians as human
as human
shields.
shields.
They would have been marching, since 2012 when Syria has gassed 500,000 Palestinians. So they don't care about it. They want to tear down America. They want to tear down the Western civilization. That's what it's all about. And I think we need to understand that. Certainly, we want to
Right.
provide as much aid and help the Palestinians as much as we can. But there's one group that wants to cause as many civilian casualties in Palestine or wherever you want to call it. And that group is Hamas. That's their strategy. We need to have as many civilians killed so we can use the propaganda to have the world gang up on Israel. And you know what? It works. It
Right.
works. But this
Right.
time, I think Israel is saying thank you for your opinion, United States, but we have to eradicate Hamas. And they will do
Right.
that.
And they deal with the everyday realities of what happens under Hamas. UNRWA schools
Yeah.
where the kids are being taught to add with the number of martyrs from the second
Yeah.
intifada straight
Yeah.
up from an UNRWA textbook, or
Yeah.
where aid is getting siphoned from like USAID funds getting sent to NGOs, and they're getting siphoned off to help Hamas and
Yeah.
different terror groups. Like, if we
Yeah.
really cared about Palestinians, we would change that too, and
Yeah.
we would
We
fight
don't.
for a two-state solution. And that's not what these students are calling for. When they say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. John, tell me, you were in Israel. What's between the river and the sea?
No, you're right.
Israel.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what they want to be gone. They want
Yeah.
Palestine to be Israel. So it's
I was
like,
I was literally on the shores of that sea. I
yeah.
went into the sea the next day and got stung by a jellyfish. I can
Oh
tell
my
you.
gosh.
I hit the sea. I know where. So yeah, no, and if we had any courage as a country, if Joe Biden came out and said, "Free Gaza from Hamas," this thing could be over in a week. If the UN come out and said, "Free Gaza from Hamas," if all these people, screaming about ceasefire, who say they care about Palestinians, Rashida Tlaib, AOC, the Hamas caucus, if you cared about Palestinians, you'd say, "Free Gaza from Hamas," because that's their only hope. That is the only hope for not just Muslims in Gaza, Muslims in Afghanistan, Iranian women, Muslims. That is their only hope. And that's what America used to be about. But I don't know what happened along the way, but we seem to have forgot who we are.
Yeah, it's incredibly disconcerting to see, Joe Biden go from saying in October, hey,
Yeah.
I don't trust Ministry of Hamas, Ministry of Gaza, Hamas run statistics on deaths, to now just like quoting it in the State of the Union. It's been a crazy roller coaster, and it just shows that Hamas's propaganda is working. And nobody wants to see this much civilian death at all. But
No.
there is another option, which is give up the hostages.
Yeah. Yeah. Give up the hostages.
Very simple request.
Give up the hostages, lay down your weapons, and everything stops. But again, their strategy works. It's been working for, ever since Israel became a nation. Commit atrocities, run and hide, use civilians as human shields, have the world crack down on Israel, and, hide and do it again. But this time, I don't think Israel's going to accept that circle because they can't. They cannot.
No, there can't be another October 7th. And what Hamas's leaders have said is, we will do this again and again and again. Yeah. Literal quote from Hamas leaders. So, what is your other option? You're right. They have to get rid of Hamas, and Hamas operates purposely underneath civilian structures. So anyway, this has been a very awesome conversation. Is there anything you would want to leave listeners with that we haven't covered today? Maybe, you've had lots of hopeful anecdotes, which is great. But But, any closing words you want to share, John?
No, I just, I appreciate everybody who's been supporting me and the efforts and coming to my shows. And I've enjoyed talking with people. Certainly, we can't do this alone. So if folks want to kind of join our mission, social media, John Ondrasik on Twitter, Fight for Fighting Music on Instagram, Fight for Fighting on Facebook, and email me, chat with me, come to a show. And I think again, we all need to kind of do this together. We can't be lone voices, and I appreciate you, Beth, for kind of having your moral clarity and spreading the word, with your pen and with your voice. Because again, I think each voice for sanity, for freedom, for hope makes us all stronger. So I would just leave that with your audience, and let's stand up and do the right thing.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I'm going to end with our constant call, which is, I love to have Afghan stories and every single episode, but for the last, 2 months, we have been out of stories from listeners about what they've been going through under the Taliban, about, just anything that they want to share, because really when it's the Afghanistan Project podcast, it's always good to have Afghan voices on it. Yes. Anybody who wants to submit a story, you can always do that at our show address, which is the Afghanistan Project Podcast at gmail.com. John, thank you again for telling everyone here about your efforts to bring a change to the world. It takes a lot of bravery and a lot of passion and time and everything that you've put into it. And it's just really encouraging to see you out there doing that. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for having me. I look forward to chatting next time.
Yeah, absolutely. And to everybody else, thanks for sharing your time, for supporting the people of Afghanistan, for listening as we talk about things outside of Afghanistan that are still so important in this world around us right now. Make sure if you've enjoyed the episode that you're following our YouTube page and that you've enabled notifications so that you can get updates on all our future episodes. And Tasha Kaur, and hope to see you again soon.